Let me move now to Tamara Flemish, and this is Europe's countries and how to deal with them visually. Actually, you can see behind me, I'm at the European Parliament in Strasbourg, and how it's complicated. 27 countries, there's a Euro area, there's a Schengen area, there's all kinds of different groupings to deal with. And Tamara, you've been working with the Status, which is the German government's statistical agency, and beyond as well. So tell us how you are working as an information designer. Now you're a web developer for Tagesspiegel in Berlin. Are you with us, Tamara?
Hello, yes, everyone. I am. My name is Tamara Flemish, and I used to work as an information designer at the Status. Today I'm going to talk about Europe's countries and how to deal with them visually. So first, let me introduce myself. At the end of my bachelor's degree at the University of Technology in Dresden, I encountered data visualization for the first time, and I was fascinated. I spent the next years working in research and investigated how we can use new and advanced technologies for data analysis. I then got the chance to work at the Status as an information designer for 1 year. Afterwards, I moved on to working at Tagesspiegel, a newspaper based in Berlin. There I get to design and develop interactive visualizations in the field of data journalism. My time at the Status. I dealt and worked with international and European data on a daily basis and created mostly static visualizations and graphics for Twitter and our website, based on European and international publications. While doing that, I encountered countless charts of other statistical offices and the public sector, which were incredibly diverse in their approaches, their designs, and the data they were using. And I noticed some interesting things, especially about European data, that they all had in common. As the EU has grown in its complexity year after year, either by having more members or even, due to recent events, less members, we have more data available than ever. And it has become evident that representing European data with its long and fairly complex history is a huge and challenging undertaking in its own. But what exactly are these challenges that we're facing when visualizing EU data? I looked at a lot of charts and identified some of the challenges of European data. Data values can cover a broad range across countries. Some are extremely high, while others are especially low with certain data types. Then, at the same time, data values can be very similar across countries, which makes them hard to distinguish in charts. The number of different countries can also be too much for one visualization, as the EU has grown immensely since its beginning. Visually representing all the countries can be quite hard when thinking about label positioning and using colors. Additionally, visual clutter because of too many data objects can also result in challenging problems. Finally, the various statuses of countries and the different versions of the EU over time can be a problem. Examples are candidate countries, the EU as a whole, the Schengen area, EU 27, EU 28, and of course, the UK's status as a former member of the EU. So let's dive into some examples. Diverse data across European countries lead to a lot of difficulty in visualizing the data, especially with position-based diagrams like bar or line charts. The visual distance between points on one axis is very large. This leads to a lot of white space and a really bad data-to-ink ratio. On the left, we can see how the empty space is used for contextualizing illustrations and highlighting data points that are extremely small and otherwise hard to read. Annotations in general are a really clever idea to use existing white space and highlight interesting parts of the data. On the right, we see a chart that is more subtle in its approach and focuses on the topmost countries by using color. Now the opposite. Sometimes data values are very similar. This chart allows us to see that the trend for the US, the Euro area, and the EU are similar, but we can't really make out any differences. The second chart further shows clearly how similar data across the EU can be, and emphasizes this challenge. In these two examples, you can clearly see how challenging it is to show all or nearly all countries of the EU and Europe. This is especially true for when we're restricted by the size of the chart because of the medium we're using, like here, Twitter. These two charts actually manage well to show a lot of countries in a very small space. One way to mitigate this challenge of having too many countries is aggregation or grouping. In this chart on the left, only the countries with the highest values are displayed on their own, while all other countries are grouped as others. Another approach that is commonly used is to group countries by properties like Western and Eastern countries in this example on the right. Regarding the different versions of the EU, it was actually really hard to find suitable examples. Often this particular challenge is just not addressed at all, and the states of the EU and some countries are not included. Something I found was that the value for certain versions of the EU is often included with the other items as just another data object, which can be quite misleading as it is completely indistinguishable from other countries. This chart, on the other hand, highlights the EU value by using color and positions countries with a special status, like the UK, separately. Most often, Eurostat is actually one of only a few agencies who explicitly tries to show different versions and states of the EU. Except for sometimes when the potential member states are the main topic. But most often, this relatively interesting information about the EU is completely omitted. In conclusion, we can see that some of the challenges are addressed in some charts, while others are completely neglected. Of course, sometimes it's not relevant to show all the previous versions of the EU, but it's enough to display the countries on their own. However, it might make the charts a lot more interesting if we add some context. But how can we actually deal with these challenges, and what resources and tools do we have to address them in database? But in general, I would say that I noticed that we're not using all the tools to their fullest potential. And I would like to give you some resources to create more insightful visualization and maybe change the way you're thinking about database. So if we want a formal and structured approach about, well, anything, we can always look towards academia and proper research. There are 3 tools inspired by research that I'd like to show to you. In her book Visual Analysis and Design, one of the leading visualization researchers, Tamara, presents a formal structure for everything that we can do with visualization. It's called marks and channels. These are building blocks for visualizations, and even complex encodings can be broken down into their marks and channels. Tamara defines marks as geometric primitive objects classified by their spatial dimensions, which often represent data points. A point, for instance, has 0 dimensions, whereas a line has 1 and an area has 2. So, channels control the appearance of marks. Here, you can see some of the many visual channels that we can use to encode information about a data point. These channels are mostly static, but there are also motion-oriented channels. Furthermore, some channels are more suited for some data types, but going into this would lead too far at this point. Some quick examples. Here, we can see a common bar chart. It encodes 2 attributes using a line mark and the horizontal and vertical position. Scatterplots also encode 2 attributes with the horizontal and vertical position channel using point marks. We can further encode more attributes by using the color and the size channels of the points. This way, we can dissect our visualizations in their parts, which makes us aware of all the options we have. It definitely helps a lot when thinking about how to show data and can even lead us towards more unique combinations. If you want to dig deeper into marks and channels, please have a look at Tamara Mansler's book. It is really one of the best visualization books out there. But besides using all the different marks and channels that are available, we can also approach visualization from a higher level and look at the different kinds of visualization techniques. There are a multitude of different chart types besides our beloved bar and line charts and our more controversial but commonly used pie charts. It's worth taking a look at more special visualization types like sunburst diagrams, chord diagrams, or even parallel coordinate plots. These are excellent choices for visualizing certain types of data and can be really fun to look at. On websites like the DataVis catalog, you can even filter the different techniques by what you would like to show, such as proportions, distributions, or a hierarchy. We can further enhance our visualizations by playing around with using animation to show time-based data, or using small multiples to show lots of similar smaller charts. We can even show the same data in multiple charts and connect them through linked highlighting. And yes, as an information designer, we should always keep our audience in mind and that the form follows the function. However, before designing our next bar chart, we might stop and think, is there maybe a more suitable visualization out there? There's one final option that I'd like to recommend, that is interactivity. Especially when we have more complex data, and I'm viewing the diverse data of the EU as complex, interactivity is crucial for overcoming the limitations of people and displays alike. At some point, it's just not feasible to show everything at once. Additionally, one static view can only show one aspect of a dataset. 25 years ago, a famous visualization researcher wrote down the premises of interactive visualizations, which today is known as Schneiderman's mantra. It gives us a guideline on how to enhance a visualization interactively and what to prioritize. He said, overview first, zoom and filter, then details on demand. In general, it's a guideline for interactivity in information space. So let's look at a very common information space, Google Maps. So first, we get an overview of Europe. We can then pan and zoom into places and decide that we want to know more about the European Parliament. We know it's located in Brussels, so we pan and zoom to focus on the Belgium capital. We then filter for EU government and can spot the EU Parliament among the results. As a last step, we can then access details on demand. This is just a simple application of Schneiderman's mantra, but we can use it for when we're building our own information spaces and visualizations. So, and what now? I hope to have given you enough ideas about the variety of tools we have in DataVis that can help us create more insightful visualizations for our audience. Now, a few more practical tips that we can actually apply to our use case, European data. So, ways to enhance our visualizations. We can use the opportunities that DataVis provides, such as the variety of visualization techniques. Another way is to use remaining channels to incorporate additional data. And another way is to add more attributes to the dataset to enrich it. And even if some improvements or additions to our original data might not be relevant at first glance, they can still contribute to a greater insight. I would like to go over one example. Here we can see a perfectly good chart by Eurostat that shows how many people of European countries can't afford a one-week holiday. We can see that they already highlight the EU average value and use separate positions for special cases, like the UK as a former member state, and Iceland, Switzerland, and Norway as non-EU states. So I wanted to add more insight to the graphic and added the status of the country to the visualization and used one of the remaining channels, color, to represent it. I used the red for candidate states, the dark blue for EU states, and the lighter blue for founding countries, and gray for non-members. We can see something that is not too surprising but still interesting. In the founding countries, more people tend to be able to afford vacation than in candidate countries. Something I was a little bit surprised by is that the non-EU countries within the dataset are among the richest countries in this context. I think that already added to the graphic, but I tried to go a step further. I used a different representation, a scatter plot, for the same data. However, I added another attribute to our dataset, the years a country has been part of the EU. I also added a trend line, which gives us even more insight into the data. So it is definitely possible and sometimes beneficial to add context and more data to a chart. However, it's also worth considering the audience. For a simple chart on Twitter that the average person won't spend a lot of time trying to understand, just sticking to the bar chart but with the color coding might be a better idea. And again, I'd like to advocate for using more animation and interactivity in our visualizations if possible. It can be extremely beneficial to support users with filter selections and highlighting options as we've seen before. Or we can even use animation to show the change over time. But most importantly, get inspired. The DataVis community out there has grown so much over the last 10 years, and there are so many great information designers, data journalists, and researchers. And you, by no means, have to create custom-built, novel, and fancy interaction techniques. But maybe you can take away one or two minor ideas from looking at other projects. So, as someone who has worked in 3 different fields with DataVis, I've seen what's out there in research and also in data journalism. And to be honest, there's a huge gap to what is often put out by statistical offices and the public sector. So I think we could really benefit from looking at other fields and maybe learning a thing or two to improve the communication of our data. So this concludes my talk, and I would like to thank all of you for listening.
Hi, Tamara. So thanks for your presentation. We do have to move on, so my apologies, but very interesting about keeping the audience in mind. Form follows the function. Make it interactive. Obviously, that's what we need to do these days. Thank you so much.